Today I want to talk about mindset. Over the last few days, you're learning a lot about technology. You're learning a lot about what it means to go digital in marketing in general and specifically in financial services. And what I want to talk about is the mindset that we have to have as marketers to really take full advantage of all of the technology that we have at our disposal. There's never been a better time in history to work in marketing. We literally have consumers juggling devices, all of these possible ways to connect with their audiences that just weren't possible before, to do it in a more direct and immediate way than was ever possible before. But I think that the challenge sometimes is the mindset that we bring when the new technology comes along. How do we bring that technology into our organizations? And I think so often the conversations can go a little bit like this. What's the big campaign idea? We're going digital. Facebook, YouTube, a mobile app, Pinterest. What are we going to do on all those channels? I don't know. We'll figure it out later. And we can end up with situations like this. This subway has no internet access, but that won't stop us from asking you to scan the QR code in this ad. If you've ever seen a QR code on the side of a moving bus or a billboard on the edge of a highway, as if on the moving bus, somebody's going to take out their phone, chase the bus down the street, somehow manage to scan the QR code, and then look at their phone. And in most cases, that'll take them to a website that's not really optimized for mobile. In a lot of ways, I think we're in an awkward adolescence of digital marketing, where the tools are coming along and it's tremendously exciting. All of the potential is there, but we haven't yet figured out how to fully embrace it with the right mindset that comes along. So I have a few cartoons sort of illustrating some of what that looks like. We're going to invest more of your portfolio in tech because the world is going digital. We just have some prospectuses and paperwork to go through first. I think my Nest smoke alarm is going off. Google AdWords just pitched me a fire extinguisher and an offer for temporary housing. Bob, sleep more than 6.4 hours. Bob, run faster than a 9.2 mile. Bob, do something about your ED. Still feeling smug about being an early adopter of wearables? Or this poor guy, he's sound asleep and his phone is ringing. The alert's going off. Finally wakes him up. Having trouble sleeping? $5 off nighttime sleep aid Liquicaps. And I think there's this mindset that as we think about as marketers, this whole marketing funnel, all these technologies just trying to move people down the funnel, do whatever drives the most traffic, like listicles about cats, relentlessly harass them with marketing automation, trick them with a bait and switch offer, and then hope they promote your brand to all their friends. And the trick is, we can't take an experience that's not fundamentally worth sharing and ask people to share them just because the tools are there to allow them to do that. We have to think a little bit deeper behind what's possible. And I think the other aspect of this is that all these tools are coming available and consumer expectations are rising. They're seeing things happen in other parts of their life, and when it doesn't match up, they're disappointed. Here's a guy in the airport, all of his flights are canceled. Honey, just be patient. The hotel brand I'm loyal to isn't optimized for mobile. Honey? Honey? She said to say she left you for another brand. And this cartoon was inspired by something that I saw from Google last year in a report they put out that said that people are more loyal to their need in the moment than they are to any particular brand. And think about that for a minute. That's such a fundamental shift of how marketing has always operated. Their need in the moment. And what does that need in the moment look like? Google calls that need in the moment micro moments that matter. And they urge all marketers to think about that for their brands. What are those micro moments that matter? And how can we as marketers deploy the technology to make those micro moments matter and ultimately to win? So if you think back to that situation I just talked about, the guy in the airport, all of his flights are canceled. How do you reach that guy when you're a hotel brand? So how many of you have ever stayed at a Red Roof Inn? It's probably not up there in terms of thinking about where the next financial brand forum will be. Red Roof Inn has about 400 hotels across the country, and it's an incredibly complicated and competitive category. How does a smaller brand like that compete against bigger brands that are out there? New digital tools are coming available, but if you look at what that looks like, you search for hotel, there are over 2.9 billion results for hotel. How do you possibly compete in that sea of clutter? If you bid on an ad, you're bidding against all of the big chains out there. So Red Roof Inn thought about this problem, and they thought about that micro moment that mattered. And they approached it in a really interesting way, which is they thought about how do we win in that moment. And they ended up developing an API that plugged into flight cancellation data across the country. And then they developed a geo-targeted ad based on where people were and the likelihood that their flight was canceled because of weather or whatever. And then they offered ads with specific distances from where they were. Flight canceled, Red Roof has you covered with rooms only 3 miles away. They set it up with an algorithm so that they bid on ads competitively just for those markets where there's a high likelihood of flights being canceled, and then they customized the creative in real time, matched with distances from the airport. And that's an example, I think, of having that mindset as marketers that we need, thinking about that micro moment that matters, and thinking about how technology can be deployed to really matter then. And as a result, they saw their mobile bookings increase by 688% in that period of time. Total online bookings increased by 60%. And it's an example, I think, of deploying that even against the big guy. They outthought the other hotel chains. And that, to me, is really exciting. Because as marketers, again, there's never been a better time in history to work in marketing. All these tools are available. And if we approach them with the right mindset, you can be the little guy like Red Roof Inn and compete against much bigger hotel chains and ultimately win. And that's a really exciting place to be. This is an example of this micro moment that matters. 2 people sitting in a cafe by the side of a street, surrounded by all of this paid media from big brands. And he's saying, I'll have what she's having. And I think that's ultimately where we want to get to as brands, particularly when you have a challenger brand mindset. How can you compete even when your pockets aren't as deep as your competitors and differentiate yourself? And that's an incredibly interesting place to be, I think. So that's what I want to talk about today, that mindset. I want to talk through a few different characteristics of what I think that mindset looks like. And I'm going to use a lot of examples that are not in financial services. I'm going to use a lot of examples from other categories because I think that the lessons are relevant to financial services too. And there's a lot to be learned there. But a quick sidebar, because I have a very odd background for a cartoonist. I started drawing cartoons, as Aaron mentioned, at Harvard Business School. But for me, it goes a lot earlier as a kid. How many of you have done this with Silly Putty? Yeah, it's the best. And as a kid, I used to do this. I used to take Silly Putty, transfer cartoons over, and change all the words to basically make fun of my brothers, which first taught me the power of a good cartoon to get my point across. And then as I got older, these 3 guys were my heroes. Bill Watterson, Gary Larson, Berkeley Breathitt. These are the 3 cartoonists from Calvin and Hobbes, Far Side, and Bloom County. I love these guys, and they were sort of my heroes. But along the way, they all retired from cartooning. Interestingly enough, Berkeley Breathitt just came out of retirement last year, about a month after Donald Trump announced that he was going to be entering the race. He couldn't afford to sit on the sidelines, which I thought was really interesting. But I let that sit for a while, and I ended at Harvard Business School. This wasn't part of my application process, but I started drawing a weekly cartoon about Harvard Business School life. I had a lot of fun with it, and when I graduated, I went into marketing and consumer products. I was at General Mills, Nestle, a small consumer packaged good company called Method, which you might know from Target. It's a cleaning company. And then I was interim chief marketing officer at a tech startup called Hotel Tonight. And along the way, my cartoons sort of followed me. I drew a weekly cartoon about marketing and what I was seeing in the world around me. And 6 years ago, my wife and I started a company full-time to communicate with cartoons and to develop marketing campaigns using cartoons. And we've now expanded with a few other cartoonists. So that's a bit about my background, just to give a sense of where I'm coming from as I think about where we are in terms of marketing. I'm really excited about the potential of challenger brand thinking, and I'm really excited about where we are today in terms of the technology that's available, and if you apply the right mindset, how you can take full advantage of that. So the first idea I want to share is the idea that Don Draper is no longer in charge. I love Mad Men, and I was so sorry that it went off the air. I found it really revealing to think about how marketing was thought of in that era. The first brand that I ever worked on was Green Giant. which was basically a product of that era. It's one of the classic advertising icons of the last century. And when I first got to my desk at General Mills, I was surrounded by all of the background reading and materials about the Green Giant brand. And I found a creative brief that was literally written by a young Leo Burnett. And it was extremely revealing to me to see how marketers thought about marketing at that time and that era. And the basic idea was that you had just a few ways to get your marketing message out there. There were 3 television stations, there were a few discrete channels, and the idea was that it was a command and control style of marketing. You define your campaign concept, and then you just push those out to a few discrete channels. And the idea, as Seth Godin describes as the TV industrial complex, was that you basically just repeat. You get your message out there, and if you repeat it enough times, people will eventually parrot that back to you. And the challenge, I think, is that we're now in a world where that doesn't work as well as it used to. Your ad ignored here. Our audiences are surrounded by a tremendous amount of clutter. And even though it's easier because of technology to get in front of our audiences, it's just as easy because of technology for them to tune out anything it is that you want to say to them, right? How do you break through the clutter? How do you find a way to get your marketing message out there? And the trick is that the Don Draper model kind of falls down a little bit here because there's no longer a captive audience anywhere. This pair is so perfect, I can't wait to buy them cheaper online somewhere. What's your Wi-Fi password? You literally don't have a captive audience even when they're inside your store. So how can you possibly engage with them? Particularly when new generations come along, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. We learn to speak your language so your generation will start to pay attention to our ads. That's why the middle finger emoji was created. We need to age down our financial services brand to appeal to a younger generation. Why are you looking at me like I'm cray-cray? So the Don Draper model doesn't work as well as it used to. Today, the marketing landscape looks much more like this. All of these nodes and touch points are ways that people find out about your brand. How do you let them know about your brand at all of these nodes and touch points? You can't possibly do it through the same type of command and control style of marketing that we were all trained on and brought up on. So here's an example in practice. So the Nutella brand is a beloved brand. A lot of people love Nutella. This guy really loves Nutella. A woman in Italy loved Nutella so much that on her own, she started a dedicated website and started a holiday called World Nutella Day. Asked people to send in pictures of themselves, like this guy kissing a big tub of Nutella, sending in recipes of things you can make with Nutella, getting people really excited about the Nutella brand. And she doesn't work for Nutella. She was just a fan. So what do you think that the owners of Nutella did when they came across Sarah Rosso, this woman in Italy? They sent her a cease and desist letter. Trademark infringement, using the brand without permissions, not the right font, not the right application of the brand. What a missed opportunity. This woman on her own had developed this incredible following for people to be able to do this level of brand engagement that marketers can only dream about. And it was squandered because it didn't follow that command and control style of marketing. I support word-of-mouth marketing just as long as we tightly control exactly what they say. Right? That's a tricky dynamic to manage. Here's another example from a different category, destination travel marketing. So how many of you have been to the state of Kentucky? So a few of you. The state would love more of you to go visit the state of Kentucky. Every state has a destination travel association to get you to want to go to their particular state. So the state of Kentucky decided that they were going to brand the state, try to rebrand Kentucky to get more people visiting. And they invested a lot in a new platform. They defined their brand as Unbridled Spirit. And then they got people tried to get people to talk about Unbridled Spirit. Facebook pages, et cetera, getting people engaged with it. And they weren't seeing a lot of traction. So along come these two guys. So these two guys happen to work in advertising and happen to live in the state of Kentucky, and they love the state. And they thought that Unbridled Spirit was kind of lame. So they decided on their own, these two guys were going to rebrand the state of Kentucky. So the first thing to do was come up with a tagline they liked a lot better. And then they went on a road show to basically get people talking about Kentucky. they went around with a simple camera and interviewed people about the state of Kentucky, all of these guys across the state. The guy in the bottom right, his job title is Turtle Man. I'm not sure what that means. And they got people talking about the state of Kentucky. They developed their own creative, again for free. In Kentucky, there are more barrels of bourbon than there are people. And they started pushing those out there, getting people to talk about the state of Kentucky. So here's what the state of Kentucky had to say about that. We certainly would not sanction or endorse that phraseology. These guys are Kentucky natives, and they love the state, but they have a different constituency, which is no one. So, yeah. Who do you think won this battle? Regardless of what Kentucky's tourism department says, we're rebranding the state. A grassroots movement is taking place, driven by proud Kentuckians, the internet's plural, and a little social media. Pretty amazing, right? Pretty amazing. But that's what got people talking. It ended up in Conan O'Brien's opening monologue, talking about the state of Kentucky. And I'm not advocating total anarchy. We crowdsourced our financial services ad on the internet. Sooner or later, if you ask the internet to pick something, they're not necessarily going to pick what you would choose. I'm sure many of you followed this recently, but in the UK, they wanted to debut a new polar exploration ship. And they had the internet pick the name for the polar exploration ship, a scientific vessel. Does anyone know what the name was that they picked? Bodie McBoatface. That's what the internet picked. They went a different direction. They overruled the internet. Hasbro had a contest to pick a new Monopoly piece, and surprise, surprise, the internet picked a cat. Justin Bieber's promotional team had a contest to pick his next tour location, and the internet picked North Korea. So, you can't control entirely what the internet is going to do with your brand. And that's a really uncomfortable place to do when you're a marketer. It's a particularly uncomfortable place to be when you work in financial services marketing. But I think that's the balancing act that we have to operate on. And I think the big question we have to ask as marketers fundamentally is our marketing worth sharing? Does our marketing recognize that there has been a fundamental shift on who really owns the brand? And it's away from those who have classically had brand in their job title, ultimately to the consumers themselves. And they'll talk about it whether the brand is part of the conversation or not. And so that's a tricky balance. But I think fundamentally, it's understanding that the Don Draper of yesteryear is no longer in charge. And there's a way, I think, to amplify and get people like Sarah Rosso of Nutella or those guys from Kentucky. Find a way to champion that and channel that rather than try to shut it down, because you can't possibly shut it down. So that's a fundamental mindset change. The second idea I want to share is this idea that technology can't save boring marketing. It's really exciting when the next thing comes along. It's really exciting when it gets written up and you come back from an event or you read about it and you think, how can we put that to use in our brand? But the challenge is, how do you do that? We need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, squirrel. And I think that happens in marketing a lot, the look squirrel, the shiny new thing phenomenon, and how do we embrace that? So I want to share an example of a brand story that I love that is very decidedly low tech, but very much worth sharing and has the right marketing mindset behind it. Because I think when you have an idea with the right marketing mindset behind it, then you can use the technology to amplify that idea and make it stronger. But if you put the cart before the horse, that doesn't always operate. So I'm curious how many of you have heard of this brand in England called Innocent? So just a couple of you. So this is kind of like the Nantucket Nectars of the UK. So I had the chance when I worked at Method to move to Europe. They asked me to launch the Method brand into England. And when I first arrived, I did what a lot of you do when you go to other markets. I walked around to see how marketing is done in that market. And I came across this brand. And I immediately liked the look of it, I liked the feel of it, but I couldn't get my head around why all the bottles were wearing hats. And they were wearing little woolen hats that didn't look like they were produced in terms of mass production. A lot of them were very different from each other. And when I looked at the promotion further, I realized that if you bought an innocent smoothie at full price, you get a little hat, and 25p would go to this organization called Age UK that would provide heating oil for the elderly in the winter. And I thought, what a cool promotion. You're giving away something at full price, and you're getting this engagement. You have this quirky idea where you get this little hat. And then I thought, where are they getting all the hats? And it turned out, and the hats were very whimsical, it turned out all the hats were actually knitted by their own consumers. They had a drive to get people to knit little woolen hats, which were then shipped in by the truckload into their warehouse and applied to these smoothie bottles. And I thought how difficult it is to get any sort of activation in a campaign, just getting somebody to sign in fill out a form. And here they were getting people actually knitting hats and sending those in to the company. But they did, and the hats were literally rolling in by the truckload, because everyone could relate to this organization or charity, whether you were somebody who directly benefited, or you had a grandmother you could relate to, or whatever it was, people were connecting to this promotion. And the hats were coming in by the truckload. There were hats knitted by the royal family. There were hats knitted by all these different people. And what I found most interesting about this idea is that when they first executed this, they had nothing more sophisticated than an email newsletter. They did it with one retail partner, and they did it with nothing more sophisticated than an email newsletter. You could not get more low-tech if you tried. You have knitting and the elderly, and yet this thing is so Pinterest ready. And which bottle are you going to pick up when you're in the store? The one that's on, the other backstory of this, by the way, is that when they executed this idea, it was partly because they were a little brand, and they were competing against Tropicana. And Tropicana wanted their space in the grocery store. And so Tropicana started going on promotion. Every other week, it was buy one, get one free, right? Innocent couldn't possibly compete in the same way that Tropicana was. They couldn't out-Tropicana Tropicana. And so they tried to think about this from a different point of view, a different approach. And ultimately, this was tremendously successful, to the point that if they had given the money off its shelf, as Tropicana was, they wouldn't have gotten as high of a lift. And that's a really interesting place to be in consumer products marketing, because often you think the easiest way to get somebody to buy something is to put it on deal, to put it on promotion, to give them something for free. And here, by having this whimsical promotion where somebody bought it at full price, with enough of a marketing story baked into it, they were actually able to beat Tropicana. And a couple years later, Coca-Cola bought this brand, partly because of how strong they were in the UK market. And the pictures rolled in, and the consumer engagement rolled in. And later on, as new things arrived, they were able to take advantage of that by amplifying and extending the idea with different forms of technology that came along. Facebook contests, different ways to amplify it, interactive games of putting hats on your coworkers. And years later, this has now raised a tremendous amount of money, but was able to put this tiny little smoothie brand that perhaps wouldn't have been able to succeed against Tropicana on the map. And so I think there's an interesting lesson there just in terms of not getting so excited about the technology that we forget about the value of the big marketing idea that is important to think of first before we layer on the technology. Okay, the third idea I want to share is the idea to think of advertising as a tax for unremarkable thinking. And this is a philosophy that came from a company many of us might know. How many of you know this company, just by looking at it? Geek Squad. So Geek Squad is now owned by Best Buy. And when they launched as a brand, they couldn't possibly compete against larger companies. And in terms of tech support, it was an incredibly fragmented market. And they didn't have much of a marketing budget to speak of. So their founder had this principle that advertising was a tax for unremarkable thinking, meaning that their idea was to try to do as much as they could as marketers without laying on above-the-line marketing dollars. They were going to try to be super creative first. And the rationale was that when they had marketing budgets later on, they could amplify and extend that message. But it was important to have a creative marketing idea come first. And so they started with the outfits. They literally show up to your door dressed like this. It's between kind of NASA and Dragnet from the 1950s. And they're literally wearing badges. And the badges aren't just tin badges, but they actually order them from the same place that the New York City Police Department gets their badges. It's a real badge. And their idea was they have to outfit these people anyway, these agents anyway. They want them to be extensions and amplifiers of the brand, because this is often the first time people touch the brand. Somebody showing up to their door like this, and they wanted to make that as remarkable as an experience as possible, literally thinking their frontline agents as a form of marketing. And look how happy these guys are. You probably recognize these little Volkswagen driving all over the place. That's also an extension and amplifier of their brand. And these guys all represent it. Sometimes a little bit on the creepy end of the spectrum, but they're really engaged with the brand. My favorite detail, though, were the shoes. And it was partly this insight early on. They realized that to order that many shoes for that many agents walking around every day, they could afford to customize the soles of the shoes. And so they literally put the Geek Squad logo in reverse on the bottom of the sole of their shoes, realizing with that many people walking on wet sidewalks, they could leave brand impressions every time an agent walked down the street. They literally thought of the bottoms of the soles of their shoes as GRPs, right? And that's what you do when you're desperate and you don't have a big marketing budget. But I think that's something that's available to any brand of any size, to think of the things that are often overlooked as a potential extension or output of your brand experience. And that if you get that right, you can then amplify and extend that message with marketing budget later. As opposed to the process of trying to outshout the competition. How much clutter will it take to break through all this clutter? Right? And nobody ever wins the outshouting the competition game. So when I joined Method, it was in the cleaning products category, which is not the most riveting category on earth. And it looks a little bit like this. It hasn't changed in a long time. It was dominated by big players. Everything kind of looked the same. And a lot of my colleagues thought I was crazy. Why would you go into a category like that? And I got excited because this little brand called Method was able to really make an impact by arriving and trying to do something a little bit different. That was their first dish soap bottle, which looked different than other dish soaps that I'd ever seen. And the lineup was a very different proposition. And I realized that one of the founders of Method had signed up to get my weekly cartoon every week. And so I sent him this as my cover letter, kind of based on the famous 1984 Apple computer ad going up against Big Blue. And I thought they were doing the similar thing in this market. And it got me excited about the power of challenger thinking, and particularly the idea of what you can do when you're under-resourced, when you have to punch harder than your weight to compete against competitors. We lined up, when I joined the company, our marketing budget had increased a little bit, but was still relatively small. We looked at our David and Goliath situation and our comparative marketing spends. We, for fun, calculated how many rolls of toilet paper our respective companies went through and realized that our competition spent more on their toilet paper budget than we had on our marketing budget. That's ultimately what we were up against. And it forced us to think really creatively. Then I had the opportunity to move to England, and my marketing budget was literally less than that. In the first year, we literally had to return profit back to the parent company. We had to be self-funding in our first year. So here we are on the first day of business in the UK. There were 3 of us on that first day, and we just learned that we could sample at a local grocery store, but we had to bring our own table. And we only had 1 table in the entire company, and our printer was sitting on it until about 5 minutes before this picture was taken. But we put that on the wall to remind us what we had to do to think in a scrappy way of things that weren't traditionally thought of as marketing. And we had really big competitors who could easily dwarf our spending. So how do you compete in that type of a dynamic? We couldn't out Fairy, basically, which is the big dish soap competitor in the UK. And so we came across this trade show called the Ideal Home Show. And we knew that 500,000 people go through that show over the course of a 3-week period. And we thought that's a perfect place to debut our brand. So we called them up and asked, how do we market within the Ideal Home Show? And they said that we could be the 100th sample in a goodie bag, basically. And how do you break through when you're the 100th sample in a goodie bag? So we decided to approach it a little bit differently, and we were going to challenge ourselves to make this marketing event self-funding. And the idea that we came up with was to invest a little bit up front in a creative booth. We couldn't completely afford it, but we were about to move into a bigger office. And we decided to have IKEA ship all of our furniture to the trade show. And so we shipped basically all the furniture of our office here, and we'd grown by a little bit at that point, and basically the entire company set up our trade show experience. But then we were stuck that we couldn't afford to have the entire company man a trade show floor for 3 weeks. And we also didn't want to do what often happens, where you hire people who don't know your brand very well, and they were sampling dog food the day before, and now they're doing your brand. So instead, we put an ad in the local papers looking for performance artists who were acting in shows around London, asking if they would be interested in a 3-week part. And so all these people showed up applying and auditioning to be representatives of our brand. The guy in the bottom center is literally a Chippendales dancer, which it turned out is a great way to get people to come to your booth. So they were really excited to be a part of it. And when the day we opened, we had this beautiful brand experience with a Chippendale dancer on the floor, getting people excited and engaged with our brand. And we decided to pay for it all rather than give away free samples. We were going to sell products at full price and hope that we would be so persuasive with our marketing that people would buy basically the equivalent of $3 or $4 to buy a cleaning product bottle and take it home with them. We made 25,000 UK pounds, $40,000 worth of sales over that period, which more than paid for the event. And it taught me a really interesting lesson as I was standing on the floor with a Chippendale dancer, watching people engage with our brand. And across the aisle, I see somebody from the big competitor who was just part of a street sampling team, not making eye contact, rapid firing samples into people's bags. And I realized that's so often what happens in marketing, is we go off the menu. We go for the easiest approach to just do what everybody else is doing and then try to break through the clutter by outspending. When if you just approach the issue from a different perspective, you can often break through the clutter in a different way. We have to do more with less, which can either be an awful situation or you could see it potentially as an opportunity. But it requires, which my next point, is to think like a challenger, to challenge the rules of the category, the way the category operates. That's no longer enough to rest on the laurels, but I'm the brand leader, not for long. And that's an exciting place to be if you're a challenger. If you can carve inroads out that the big guys might be missing. Or if you're a big guy, you can think like a challenger and carve new inroads. Where complacent brands go, stuck in the status quo, didn't take challengers seriously. And I think the opportunity there is actually really exciting to approach it and actually take share from complacent brands. When I joined the cleaning products category, there were a lot of rules of the category of how the category supposedly operated. Design doesn't matter. People are just going to keep everything under the kitchen sink. Without stopping to think, maybe the reason people are hiding these bottles under the kitchen sink is because they're so ugly to look at. And if you question that rule of the category, you can end up with something like this. And that's really exciting, is to think about whatever the rules of the category are in your industry and think about ways to flip those around. There was a story in NPR last week of the University of Michigan realizing that there was an opportunity to rethink mortgages that didn't use interest to appeal to people who are Muslim. And they launched a whole Islamic banking division on the back of it, completely rethinking some of the fundamental principles of how things operated and finding new opportunities and inroads. Here's a category most of us are familiar with. If you work at Johnson & Johnson, there's a reason why every single box on the shelf is where it is. They justify every linear inch. They have category decision trees and shopper insights to justify why the category looks like this. But if you actually walk down this aisle and you have a headache, the only thing this is going to do is make your headache worse. Right? And I think sometimes as marketers, we get so trapped in tunnel vision thinking about the category working a certain way, we forget how it can often be. And it creates opportunities for challenger brands like Help. A brand came along a few years ago and just launched 3 products. Help, I have a headache. Help, I can't sleep. Help, I have an aching body. It's so simple. But purely on the back of having a simple proposition, Dwayne Reed gave them a dedicated end cap for free for 6 months because they were able to simplify the category better than their category captain, Johnson & Johnson. That's the opportunity when you think like a challenger and rethink the rules of the category. And I think that's available now more than ever because so many of the rules within financial services are changing. Help had a whole proposition shift that everyone in the drug aisle talks about more, bigger, faster, extra, super, ultra, and maximum, and they were going to go the other direction. For fun, they uploaded their designs onto a crowdsourced design website and asked the internet to redesign their products according to the rules of the category. And the bottom row is what the internet came up with. And that's exactly what happens. That's the path of least resistance as marketers. If we think too closely within our prescribed category, we end up with that bottom row and not the top one. And the opportunity, I think, the mindset that I think that has to happen is to think more in the top row and to take advantage of thinking about the category differently. And that opens up exciting new insights, like when they went into the Band-Aid category. They realized that there was something called a marrow registry, so you could become a donor. And the biggest challenge is getting samples of people's blood types. So they included they realized that if people are using Band-Aids, that's a blood sample right there. So in every pack of Band-Aids, you have a return address envelope to send in your Band-Aid, and you're immediately added to the marrow registry. It's a really interesting way of thinking about it, but thinking about it from outside of the rules of the category, how it typically operated. Now let's pick the innovative idea with the greatest potential to keep things exactly as they are. Instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by continuing our slow decline into obsolescence. When I worked at General Mills, our chief marketing officer encouraged us when we first joined the organization, the first thing that you do is you take an empty notebook and you fill it full of everything you think about the category before you join the team. And you're corrupted by all the wonderful knowledge we're about to give you. And then you'll refer to that notebook as your greatest treasure because it reminds you of what it was like before you thought like a marketer. It reminds you what it was like when you actually thought like the consumer that you're trying to reach. And I think that's a powerful insight for anyone. Okay, the fifth idea I want to share is the idea that the best marketing doesn't feel like marketing. We all know what it's like when we're marketed to, but so often we just think about from a marketing perspective. I have new baby pics to share. I just got back from my reunion. Did you know that we have 7 subs under 6 grams of fat? If you're going to crash our news feed, at least make it interesting. I think so often marketing can feel a little bit that Subway sandwich in the conversation that's kind of barging in and approaching it from that point of view. So here's an example of a marketing program that I really liked that took advantage of a technology but really thought about it from the perspective of the end audience. So this is a technology that came along a few years ago. It's called Chalkbot. It's basically a robot that's capable of spraying a road surface with chalk. You can program it to write whatever you want. And you think as a marketer, that's pretty cool. You could literally drive across all the country and just write marketing message everywhere you go. Nike came across this. And instead of drawing the world's longest Nike swoosh or writing every single features and benefits about their shoes, they decided to send Chalkbot to the Tour de France. And they rigged it so that people could provide messages of cancer support, and Chalkbot would write it onto the road surface. Then take a picture of that message, tag it with geo-coordinates, and send it back to the person who supplied the message as a physical artifact of this message that they put on the road. And the entire route of the Tour de France was covered with these messages that were sponsored and brought to the organization by Nike. But there's no heavy-handed marketing here. You know, their insight was that it wasn't about the bike, it wasn't about the race, it wasn't about the shoe, it wasn't about the brand, it was about you, which I think is a really interesting way to approach marketing. How do you think about it when it's about you, truly about you, the audience that you're trying to reach and to serve? And so often marketers can sound a bit like this, but enough about me. What about you? What do you think of me? If you were to look inside the mind of the consumer, my husband, my kids, career, friends, mom and dad, I don't see our brand of pickle relish anywhere. Inconceivable. This is a brand loyalist. I think so often as marketers, we're so engaged in our own brands that we start to breathe our own exhaust. And we forget about the filter that actual people we're trying to reach would approach it. And until we flip that, no matter what we do in terms of technology or social engagement or whatever, we'll ultimately fall a little bit flat because the best marketing doesn't feel like marketing. And there's a shift that a lot of people are talking about trying to show more purpose in what we do. It's something that we did at Method. We started describing our brand as people against dirty, because dirty was more than just sort of from a clean versus dirty standpoint. There were environmental standards. It wasn't just about the dust bunnies under the couch. And we started to discover that our own audiences, our own consumers were starting to use people against dirty to describe themselves. We started branding every cleaning product made by and for people against dirty. And we tried to blur the lines between who we were and the people that we were trying to serve. And it completely changed the view of marketing that I'd always been brought up on. It changed it to one where the belief was at the core. We were branded from the inside out, and our job as marketers were to create conversations based upon that. And that became a filter for everything that we did. It transformed how we did things, even in a category as boring as household cleaning, that you could bring interest to the category because ultimately it was about the people that you were reaching. Very early on, as I showed with the Ideal Home Show, we tried to think about what our brand would look like in 3D. The first time we did this, we only had a few products. And we started doing pop-up shops as just an exercise on how you demonstrate your brand in 3D and to bring it to life. And we had a confession booth that you could go in dirty and come out clean. We had all of our products out there, but it forced us to think about our brand more expansively as just a list of features and benefits. This idea that our brand was more like a lighthouse that we wanted to build that would be so appealing that people would want to navigate around it. And it sort of transformed then how we approached every marketing opportunity that came along later. Okay, the sixth idea I want to share is this idea that if you try to appeal to everyone, you're going to appeal to no one. So often marketing can feel a little bit like this. Who else should we target? When I worked at General Mills, our chief marketing officer used to joke that every creative brief that crossed his desk seemed like it was written for target audience, woman, age 18 to 49 with a pulse. And no surprise that sometimes the brand executions would seem just watered down and generic. And the opportunity, I think, for brands in this space with the technology we have available is to go very laser targeted, very niche in who we're trying to reach, and to have promotional events that really speak to a core. Because when you speak to a core, you'll reach other people, but you'll reach them with much more interest and less apathy. No, that's too polarizing. Let's go with the idea that makes everyone feel equally indifferent, which I think can happen sometimes too. Or this guy in the shoe store, running, hiking, climbing, cycling, all in one, where we try to be all things to all people. And after I drew this, I came across an actual picture of that shoe. Not sure the use case for this one. How many of you have heard of a brand called Sailor Jerry? So a few of you. It's one of the fastest growing spirits brands in the United States. They competing against Captain Morgan. They're in the spiced rum category. It's a brand that's based on the legend of a famous World War II tattoo artist, the guy that's right here, named Sailor Jerry. Basically architected a brand out of his mythology. And they can't afford to compete like Captain Morgan and larger brands. So they have to be deliberately exclusive in their marketing, which ends up creating these tremendous ripple effects. And here's an example of one of their marketing programs. They found a place where there was a bar next to a tattoo parlor. We're in a city with a lot of those. And they had this following proposition that if you were willing to get a tattoo of Sailor Jerry permanently tattooed on your skin, they'd reward you with one shot of Sailor Jerry. Not like $1,000 or a chance to win a grand prize, anything like that. One shot of Sailor Jerry. And it may be hard to tell on the screen, but there are a lot of people in that line. And there are umbrellas because it's raining. They're literally waiting in the rain to get a tattoo of a brand that they connect with. This is not for everyone. But all these people showed up. And they're not people who you might think who already have a lot of tattoos. They're people getting them sometimes places that might be hard to forget. But they're doing it because they connect with this brand. And the brand didn't even have to send their own photographers to the event. All of these pictures were taken by other people who were there. There was somebody interviewed in line who said, "I'm in love with Sailor Jerry. All I drink is Sailor Jerry. You know what? A lot of people don't really understand, and I don't expect them to because Sailor Jerry is mine." It's a little creepy, actually. It's really creepy. But they knew as a brand that by appealing to people like Sebastian, they were reaching a core who felt deeply meaningful about the brand. And even if you weren't willing to go to these lengths, you'd hear about that story and would have some resonance. You would occupy something in people's mind that wasn't the same as every other brand that was out there by being deliberately exclusive and talking to those that are on more of the lunatic fringe of their customer target portfolio. Those people would end up talking about the brand. Don't worry, it's only marketers collecting our personal data so they can create more relevant advertising for us. We obviously have to thread a needle here, but there's a lot of opportunity to know our audience better than ever before. We discovered at Method that there was somebody who had started a dedicated website just about Method. It was called One Man's Lust for All Things Method. And he updated at least 3 times a week. He was publishing more about our brand than we were. But we knew by having somebody like that out there that we were resonating with a group, and therefore we're likely connecting with a larger group of people. I think that's an opportunity for everybody. Okay, the 7th idea I want to share is this idea that marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. This was our compromise with legal. This might be particularly familiar to you in financial services marketing. There are a lot of people who influence the brand who are not classic marketers. Think about the people in branches, if you have branches. Think about all the people who in customer service. All of those people are extensions and touch points of your brand. All of those people can control the brand message if you can amplify that correctly. And so often in organizations, it gets extremely siloed out. Free range won't work. They're happier in separate pens when they can blame each other when things go wrong. And I think that's such a missed opportunity. And it's so exciting when you can engage people. But when you don't, what often happens is you have an idea in an organization, eureka. And over time, this idea gets watered down because of others who are touching it, who aren't thinking like marketers. So part of your job in a marketing organization is to excite everybody in the organization to think of themselves as marketers, even if they aren't classically trained in marketing. It's so easy to have turned that innocent woolly hats idea into a neck dangler, a cardboard neck dangler that would be totally forgettable. But the biggest marketer on the team was the one in the warehouse who didn't see the challenge of having all these woolly hats shipped to the warehouse and didn't think of it as just an operations headache to apply them to each bottle, but instead thought of that as a potential way and a touch point for the brand experience. And as marketers, I think part of our job is to be leaders in that and get people excited about it so that it doesn't just become whack an idea. This is a picture of the back of the very first Apple Macintosh. If you took the back off, you'd see the signatures of every single person who touched the Mac. It's the designers, but it's also the supply chain people. It's everyone who touched that Mac and brought it to life. And imagine how you'd feel if you'd signed this before you shipped a single unit. You'd make sure that it was delivered on time and full. You'd make sure that every part of the brand experience was exciting. I saw a box of Duncan Hines cake mix a couple of years ago that had signatures on the bottom of the box. And all I could think of was that was the team that brought that limited edition SKU to life. They felt like they were really part of the team. And I think that's an exciting opportunity for any brand, and financial services in particular. Some of our best ideas in marketing at Method came from those not in marketing. We had a vehicle that was the first biodiesel freight route between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And somebody in the supply chain group thought, hey, you're going to this big natural products expo, and it's really expensive to get a booth. Why don't you just take the 18-wheeler and park it out front and pay the parking tickets all day long, and that'll be less expensive than the booth. Maybe borders on the side of not being totally legit, but in the early days of the brand, that's what they did, and every article written about that Natural Products Expo couldn't miss the 18-wheeler because of somebody in supply chain who thought like a marketer. And everything about the Method Factory turned into an amplification of the brand for that reason. All of these people work in R&D and other aspects of the brand, but they're ultimately all marketers. And when they think about themselves as marketers, the brand experience gets stronger. The head of brand experience at Innocent has this wonderful description of a brand, which is that Innocent is made up of thousands of nice little touches, which I think is a wonderful explanation of what a brand really is and that mindset that we need to bring. Because when everybody is engaged to think like a marketer, it can go a lot further. And it becomes something different than death by a thousand cuts. The last idea I want to share with you is this idea of making your customers awesome. I read something from a software engineer a few years ago that I liked, that it doesn't matter how awesome your product is, your awesome thing matters only to the extent that it serves the user's ability to be a little more awesome. And here's one of the brands I think that epitomizes this. This is a fashion brand in San Francisco called Beta Brand. They compete against J. Crew and Banana Republic, and they knew they couldn't afford to compete in the traditional way. So they decided they were going to launch one new product every single week and get people to talk about it. Their idea is that they were 1% fashion, 99% fiction. So every week they'd launch a new article of clothing. For Thanksgiving, they launched the Gluttony Pants. These were pants that had an extra button to fit your American Thanksgiving meal. That did really well, so they launched an article of clothing for each of the 7 deadly sins. This is the Lust skirt, which would do well in this city. It's a skirt made out of disco ball material. They made something called the Envy Pants. They made only one pair, and they sold it on eBay on auction model to get people talking about it. The top one went for $900. So all along, people are getting excited about the brand. These are the preposterously patriotic pants they started selling, which they matched eventually with a caperin for barbecue season. So all these are, you wear these clothes and you feel pretty awesome about the brand. These were special mud flaps when you're cycling. They're reflective mud flaps on the back of your pants. These prevent people from scanning your credit card information in the lining of the pocket. So these got the brand talked about. Some of these did better than others, but they manufactured locally, they could make it quickly, and they could get people excited about the brand. When everyone was talking about Mark Zuckerberg wearing a hoodie in his IPO roadshow, they launched the executive hoodie. This dress looks pretty innocuous until you realize that it's made up of those little poo emojis on your phone. But the most amazing thing about the brand, they didn't have big budgets. They decided that they were going to make the people they were making awesome through the clothes. All these are talk pieces. You talk about the clothes as you're talking about yourself. They decided to re-engineer their entire website to make it about the audience. They started rewarding you when you'd send in a picture of yourself doing something wearing the clothes. And they give you a dedicated URL that made it look like you were the model of this weird clothing company in California that you then wanted to share with all of your friends when you're wearing a Red Devil smoking jacket or you're out with your team. Some of these are a little bizarre, but pictures that you want to share with everybody that you know. And along the way, this little brand goes for the ride. Not because of what it says about the clothes or the brand specifically, but because of what it says about the people who are posting these pictures. They're sharing these because of what it says about themselves, and on the way, they're helping extend and amplify the brand experience. This guy is skydiving into Burning Man, which is a pretty amazing feat, but it's made all the more amazing because he's wearing these pants made out of disco ball material, and through the Beta brand site, he's able to show it about himself. I think ultimately that's what brands are all about. Having these types of moments that get people excited to bring your brand along for the ride, not by what it says about them, but what it says about you ultimately. I just want to close by saying thank you, and if you've liked these cartoons, they're at marketunist.com, and I hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.